Right, so I'm starting to think about planting for the pond now, and I've got this very large mature stock of water lily here which needs some attention. Now this has got so large and it's got such a dense sort of canopy of pads, and the rhizome has grown so large it's become very buoyant. So the whole thing is essentially floating. So time to be taken out of the basket, split, potted on, and from something like this we should be able to make 2 or 3, you know, really good sized plants. Sometimes you've got to cut these things out of the basket. This isn't too bad. Just getting rid of some of the excess roots that are growing through the mesh basket will probably be enough to get this out completely. There we go. And actually that basket is still salvageable to get used again. So I'm going to chop this up into some useful sections. All you need really is a shoot and a root, and with the water lilies you've got the thick rhizome, and there's always growing tips. The edge of the outer edge of the rhizome is where most of the growth tends to be, and then from this you'll get little eyes of growth, you know, in various positions, and they can be broken off, and each one of those is going to become a good viable plant. And the easiest way to do this is hack it up with a saw, or get a spade to it and chop it up. You can be pretty ruthless with this sort of thing and it won't cause any harm at all. So this is the sort of thing I'm looking for, and I'm not being too overly precious about the pads. A lot of these are going to have to be trimmed back. Likewise with the flowers, it's really a little bit late in the season now for any of these to do anything, particularly the used flower buds, so most of this is going to get trimmed back. We're already in September, another sort of 6 to 8 weeks at most, and all of the lilies growing in the pond and all of the marginal plants will then get trimmed and cut right back to nothing as well. So this is really being planted for next season and not to do an awful lot at this time of the year. But this is what I'm after: a nice big section of rhizome, a few white tap roots or fibrous roots, and a decent amount of pad as well. That's actually big enough really to plant on its own in a basket like this, because it doesn't take an awfully long time for plants to really establish and start to take over. But I'll probably try and squeeze in about 2 of these per basket. There we go. There's another good one. You know, lilies aren't cheap. To buy an established, you know, plant like this potted up, a good one, you know, you're looking at sort of 20 or 30 pounds for each plant. So you want to look after these and try and get as much out of what you've already got as you can. I'm going to work my way around, chop this up into useful pieces, and then I'll take up in a minute when I've done so. Okay, so I've dealt with the lily, I've chopped it up, and I've been able to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 good viable plants. If I was really desperate, I've got a lump of rhizome here which has still got quite a few growing tips. Although it might take another season or 2 to really establish, this will produce, you know, decent plants as well. Now, I'm not using any aquatic compost. It used to be the traditional method to use a plastic mesh basket like this, to line it with a Hessian square or a foam square, fabric liner of some sort, to fill it up with aquatic compost, a lime-free, low nutrient compost, to plant up, and then to cover that surface with 1 inch or 2 of gravel to stop the soil leaching out and to stop the fish from rummaging around inside and causing any issues. But actually I've sort of moved away from doing that unless I'm losing really delicate plants. Water lilies particularly want to have a very heavy, well-anchored base so that they're not going to come to the surface, and a big robust plant like this is going to have no problems at all growing in just a gravel as its growing medium, as its growing substrate. So I'm not using any aquatic compost whatsoever. This is cheaper and it's going to keep the plant well anchored for a lot longer. I've partially filled the basket with a bit of 20mm gravel. This is the gill mill that I've been using on the marginal shelves on the pond. Got some left over, so we'll use it here. and I shall grab a section of my chopped up plant. And place these in the basket with the tips of the eyes at what will eventually be surface level. You don't want to bury the growing tip of that rhizome too deep. That's going to cause problems for the plant. It's going to slow it down, and if it's too deep it won't grow at all and the rhizome will start to rot. So keep that at sort of surface level. And then it's a simple case of just filling around these rootstocks with your gravel. Now you could do this with a finer 10mm gravel. In fact, most plants would probably prefer a slightly finer substrate to grow through, and that's still dense enough and heavy enough to keep the plants well anchored. If you've got fish in your pond, goldfish and particularly koi or anything with a larger mouth, 10mm gravel is not going to stay in the basket for very long, and you'll find the fish are going to rummage around in there looking for a tasty morsel, and the gravel will be out just as easily as the soil. So in that case, use 20mm. If you've got big koi, traditionally you wouldn't keep plants at all, but you can get away with some water lilies as long as they're robust varieties. And then what I would do would be to cover this with a plastic frame, a bit like a hanging basket cover, which will allow the pads to grow through, but it's going to prevent the fish from getting down into this substrate and causing any problems. A very fine horticultural grit would be ideal for smaller varieties of plants and marginal plants, but again, only really in a fishless environment. I wouldn't recommend something quite as fine as that if you've got fish. And there we go. Give it a little shake to make sure that the gravel has filled all those voids. And before this goes in the pond, I'm going to give it a really good soaking with the hose, just to get rid of some of the dust and the dirt which is caught up in this gravel. And you'll see that all around the edges from the mesh basket, all this sort of milky white yucky water will come out. I'd rather that was cleaned up before it went in the pond. So I'll carry on and work my way through these, and I should get three good baskets out of this, and then they can go in the pond. Now to get these lilies washed out and get the gravel cleaned up. And one issue with a basket this size filled with gravel is it's rather heavy. So I'm just going to use the hose here, rinse out all this dust and muck from the gravel. I'm not going to get all of it out, but you'll see very shortly a lot of dusty, mucky, milky water coming out of this. And if we can prevent it from getting in the pond, all the better. Of course, this is going to make it even heavier for me to carry into the pond. And it's going to be quite a challenge getting these 4 feet down in the pond, but we'll give it a go. Right, that'll do. So this pond, when it's full, it's going to be 5 feet or a fraction over. So really at the extreme of what's wadable. Big lilies like this, about 4 feet of water above the pot is about the kind of desired or the maximum quantity you want to go for. So allowing for the height of this pot, these guys are going to be quite happy right down at the deepest section. And unfortunately, I'm not in the deepest section yet. I have a feeling I'm about to get wet. That's as far as I could go. Right, that's one. And we've got about another, well, the pads are 6 inches from the surface. There's probably another 10 to 12 inches of water above this. But it'll grow in that depth, it'll come to the top. Let's put the next one in. That's very close to the limit. Wow. And hopefully with a lucky drop, it'll land the right way round. Good, done. So this is going to provide 2 lovely big islands of foliage in the centre of the pond next season and help to deflect some of the current and the flow from that cascade, because it's quite strong, from this side of the pond where we can have some slightly more delicate smaller lilies where it's a bit shallower. So it's time to do some of the fun bits, planting. I did have a query on one of my last YouTube videos where a subscriber asked me if I could explain and demonstrate how to plant these or how I'm doing it. And it's very simple. I've got some sections of bare rooted marginal plants. So here I've got some lovely Pondateria, some pickerel plants. This is a nice late flowering marginal plant. Most pond plants tend to be over far too quickly, so it's nice to have something which is going to flower towards the end of the season. So this has got some nice little purple flower spikes. Some slightly taller plants for the back of Sally here to frame her. We've got some Cyperus longus, which is a variety of sedge. The hardy umbrella plant is another name for this, and this is a nice, very tall, sort of slender, erect plant which is going to get to about a metre and a half in height, so sort of head height on Sally here. And then the other side I've got some Typha laxmani, or slender reed mace. Bulrush, a lot of people will know it as, although it's not a bulrush, it is a reed mace. And again, this is going to be quite a nice tall architectural plant which is going to frame the statue here. And literally all I do is rake aside some of the gravel to create a little depression that I can then put my plant in. Make sure that the top of the rhizome or the top of the growing tip isn't too far underneath the gravel. Simply rake it back over. And this is going to allow the roots to grow freely in these planting zones, but they're going to be governed by the depth of the pond. It's far too deep here, so they're only going to be able to grow in this shallow marginal section. At some point in the future they're going to have to be kept in check, and some of the plants are going to have to be pulled out so that it nicks and sort of cross between the two. This is going to allow them to grow freely and naturally and look an awful lot nicer than having plastic baskets lopsided on one side or having the plastic on show. Really, really simple. Very quick way of planting. Now again, at this time of year, in fact the pickerel, we might still get some flowers from this. In fact, here we go, here's a flower spike which is yet to open. So this might still provide a bit of interest. The Cyperus and the Typha, I've had to cut back. They get very top heavy, they look very scrappy, so I've cut that right back. We'll get a few new shoots at this time of year, but not a lot. Everything will then get cut back into the late autumn, early winter, and then next season it will allow it all to grow through unhindered and we'll get the full sort of effects of this planting. These are lovely plants, the pickerel, one of my favourite marginal plants. I love the almost tropical texture and sort of shape of these leaves, lovely. They're a little bit fragile, hollow stems, almost like a succulent, and they're very easy to snap, so you've got to be careful doing this. And what I'll do when I finish is to go around with a pair of secateurs and just trim away any broken bits or stems that don't look particularly neat and tidy. See, already this is just enhancing this area, a bit of green, a bit of foliage around features like this. Really, you know, make it pop, bring it out. Now I want to sort of underplant all of this sort of thing with some much lower growing, almost carpeting plants. Things like some Nasturtium aquaticum, ornamental watercress, smaller varieties of Caltha, marsh marigold, water mint, that kind of thing. Just running through the lot will help to conceal some of the cables and pipework and provide a bit of low covering plant, and again help to just soften all of this sort of hard landscaping. So I'll work my way round, get the rest of this planted up. There's a long way to go, a lot of marginal shelves and space in which to plant, and I've got plenty of other plants, some lovely purple iris, some Caltha, another rootstock which I'm going to plant up in here. So lots to do. There we go. It's just a small selection of plants positioned around the statue, Sally there. Makes a big difference. A lot more to plant. Well, the pond's been filling overnight, and finally we've got an almost complete level, and what a difference it makes when you can see the pond sort of raised up like this. So we've still got potentially another 6 inches of depth, perhaps a little bit more, before we reach maximum volume. But even if it were to be kept at this sort of lower level in the future, it's enough to cover the marginal shelf, it's enough to conceal the liner, and it looks nice and natural. But today's job is I need to start cracking on with completing the Cascade. Now I've essentially completed the first couple of spills, the first section, but I need to build up this next section of Cascade. The majority of this is going to be done using the foam fix, using the expanding foam. But the spill stones, over in this section right here, I want to do a double spill. So some water pouring over a stone here and some water pouring over a stone in this direction. And to do that, it's a little bit tricky. I have to make sure that both spill stones are dead level, that the front and the rear of both stones are level to each other. And to do that, I'd rather sit that on a bed of mortar rather than use foam. So I'm going to fix these 2 spill stones here with some cement, and then the remainder of this I will foam fix into place, which means I can dry stone lay it first, get it into a sort of a position that I like the look of, and then I can start to fix with the foam. And I'll show you in a bit more detail how I do that. So I'm just at the position now where I'm out of breath after moving these, where I'm starting to think about the position and the angle of these spill stones. Now this is the area where I want to have a double kind of spill, some water pouring this way, some water pouring this way, and there'll be a stone, sort of a form of island here, which is going to divert the water either side. But as I said before, it's very important that both these stones, both the front spill and the rear of the stone, are essentially level, so that both of them are going to fill and allow the passage of water to equally flow over. Of course, I can kind of, you know, do some micro calibrations at the end once this is done with the placement of a few stones and gravel and bits and pieces, and that will help to deflect water one way or the other. But it's important to get these stones in now really, you know, nice and level. So I've got a bucket of muck on the go, and I'm just sort of dry positioning these until I'm in a position where I'm happy with the angles, which I think I've got. It's really important that I pay careful attention to the level of these stones further down, because of course this spill stone here is going to govern the depth of the water in this area and govern the height of the drop for the next stone. It's really easy to put these stones into position, cement them down, and then when you run it later on, and I've seen this happen many a time, although not by me personally, that the spill stones end up submersed underwater, which is of course is not the idea. So I'm working along with the level as I go. I want to have a, you know, an inch or two drop between here and the next level. It doesn't need to be quite as big as the final spills, but just enough to have an obvious spill to create that sound of water, and it will look natural. It doesn't need to be too big. And equally, I've got to be very careful about whatever I do with the spill stones here is going to dictate the level behind it. It's going to dictate the water level here. I don't really want the edging stones to go much above sort of mean ground level. So I've got to pay careful attention to ground level and the relationship between that and the spill here. And again, I've got to have a good clearance of sort of 2 or 3 inches between what will be water level here and then the edging of the liner, which I would like to obviously lift up to contain the water. So I've got enough flexibility here to lift the stones comfortably an inch or so, and in doing so, that will give me a reasonable drop to the stone behind. So I'm going to prop these up now with some bits and pieces just to mock that sort of height up, and then when I'm happy with that, I'll take it apart, put a layer of muck down, and then I'll reset them permanently. Morning everybody, another gorgeous day. Yesterday I completed the Cascade, foaming all the rocks and bits and pieces together. You might be able to hear that running in the background over there. Very pleased with the result, and today is going to be a day of tidying up the edging, concealing all of the pond liner, dressing the sides, cleaning up some of the foam and bits and pieces that's visible, and just doing all the fun sort of dressing bits and pieces. The pond is beginning to clear quite nicely. So all in all, it's really coming together, and I'm getting quite excited actually at the prospects of completing this job. Not because I want to end it, but just because I'm really looking forward and excited to seeing the finished result as well. Really pleased with Sally, the statue here. She's looking lovely in clear water. When those plants grow up, she's going to look fantastic. Still got the patio here to make a start on, which I'll probably start either later on this afternoon or tomorrow. But it's a lovely sound from that Cascade. A nice choice of statue, this one. It's very easy with water features to end up with things that look quite twee, lots of squirrels and hedgehogs and sort of cheap plastic and resin, but this is a nice solid stone statue. It's a nice classic, timeless, and it's going to fit in really with any kind of feature. Likewise, as a style of feature, you can never go wrong with a Cascade. It'll fit in with a formal design, using something more contemporary, water blades, rills, that kind of thing, or a more naturalistic kind of style Cascade such as this. But always a fantastic way of returning water from a filtration system, a great way of adding aeration and circulation to a pond, and really what it's all about is just the sound of water. It's lovely. great flow coming over these rocks. And this is utilising the two pumps, the Aquamax Eco Premium 20,000, which is running full max on the Cascade, and then we've got that Premium 16,000 running as a secondary auxiliary pump. I've tweaked it down slightly. I think the 16K is running at about kind of 70 or 80%. It could go up a little bit more, but I like the flow from this. Just close your eyes. Imagine you're out in the mountains somewhere and listen to that noise. So as I said, all the stonework had been foamed into place apart from the spill stones, which I wanted to mortar into place and make sure they were sat on a proper foundation. And then once I've done that, I've dug a little trench all the way around the sides of the excavation here and filled this with some cement. I just wanted to make sure that there was something a little bit more solid than just the earth holding the liner back. And now that's gone off, the inside of the Cascade can be filled with a little bit of cement or concrete as well. I want to keep these levels again very similar to the background and the edging of the pond. The fill needs to be slightly lower than stone level so that there's still a slight depression that can be covered in soil. I mean, this is pretty good. The foam itself is above water level here, and I probably could just cover that in soil, but I just want to be absolutely certain that we're going to minimise wicking. So all these voids here can be filled up. Then the pond liner can be trimmed back, soil and turf brought right up to the edge, and then this will be almost complete. The 4-inch discharge with the Cascade is fitted through the liner with a 4-inch liner connector, just like the overflow, and that's great. It means that we've got a decent flow of water coming down the Cascade via gravity rather than sort of pressurised from the pump. And that means that the water comes out already looking natural. It's not being forced out, you know, under a unnatural pressure. It's just coming out under its own gravity, which slows it down nicely. Here we've got the slightly slower flow. Up into this section, you can just see it bubbling out here. I'll need to put a few stones over that to conceal that. And that's where the secondary pump is discharging into, so that we've increased the flow now coming over this broader spill section. Good stuff. Play change. Cascade is complete. Just need to put some grass seed down now. Fast forward a few weeks and let it green up. Add a few plants and that will be the final dressing. I'm really pleased with how it's come out. I think it looks fantastic against the natural kind of slope of the garden, blends in quite nicely. Great flow coming over it, a great sound. And as I stand here in my waders, I have to say I've discovered I've got a leak, so I'm going to be very quick standing in this pond. Yeah, cloud as punch, good moment this.